Hi everyone, it's Nicky Jameson here from Nicky Jameson Art. Today we're going to look at creating some selections and how you can create these selections to make abstracts and also to create stencils. So I've created some selections here and I've painted inside these selections with a watercolor brush. So I've used different colors to make these marks, and you can see that the colors are merging, but they're only merging within the selection. Now, because I removed the selection, it started to merge outside the selection. So I had to dry the layer to stop that diffusion. You can always turn on your visual settings and reduce the diffusion speed, and you can also reduce the drip length to very, very low, or you can dry the layer. So what we're going to do is we're going to create some selections, and then I'm going to show you how you can actually make stencils with them as well. So, and it's a good way to make your own stencil. So we are in Rebelle 6 Pro. I'm going to close that layer and open my top layer. And if you watch my previous video on selections, it will show you how to create selections in a lot more detail than we're going to do here. But you can create a selection by going to the selection tools, so tools at the top here, and you go to this one here which is highlighted, and you get a range of selection tools. So right now I'm on the freehand, but you can use a polygon or circle or ellipse or square. And so with the ellipse, you're going to draw a circle. You can press shift to constrain it, and if you don't want that, so I'm going to press enter there. But I also want to add more than one on this particular canvas. So I'm going to go to add to selection, which is the two boxes here, and I'm going to draw another selection here. I'll just press shift. I actually want it to be more of a circle, so you can manipulate it. If you press control, you can manipulate it horizontally or vertically. Okay, so I'm going to move that there. I'm going to go and I'm going to press enter to commit that, and I'm going to go to add a selection again. I'm going to draw another circle, and I'm just going to place that there. Press enter. Let's do it again. Add a selection. You can make the circle really small. Don't forget to press shift to constrain it, and then you can, let's just move it. So I'm making them quite close together. I'm pressing enter again, and I'm going to do add to selection. Now what I'm doing here is I'm adding these things to, it's the same selection. It's going to be the same selection. Okay, so this one whole thing is going to act as one selection as opposed to several. So I'm back there again. I'm just going to press enter. When you press enter, you kind of release it. So let's do that again. Press shift. Let's make it around here. Press enter. And I want to add another selection here. When you press enter, you release the add to selection again. Let's do a fairly, I don't know, one here. Move it around. Press control. Actually, shift will make it. We'll keep it. If you want to keep it circle. Okay. So I'm going to keep that there, and then press enter. Now, if you want to add like another shape, like let's say a polygon. Remember, with a polygon, you will make some points. So you tap and you close up. Don't forget to close up the points. Ooh. I'm not going to do Control D because something happened there, and I almost lost my selection, which I did not want to do. I only wanted to get rid of this particular one, but I'm going to ignore that for now. Now, if you wanted to keep this, if you wanted to keep it to use something else, you can actually create a stencil from this selection. Okay, so what you do is you go to Stencils, you select Create Stencil from Selection, and then it will create this as a selection. Because you've created this as one selection, it's going to create all the shapes on this selection. Okay, so you can then manipulate the selection there, and what happens is that it puts it in the selection library here. So now we've got a selection, and you can show and hide the selection by clicking this on and off. There's a little eye at the bottom of the selections panel, and if you click it on, it will show you the marquee thing or the mask. If you click it off, you get what we had before. Okay, so now we've got a stencil, and now what we're going to do is paint in the stencil. So I'm going to choose this, and I'm going to choose I'm going to go to my watercolor brushes. You don't have to keep this on. In fact, if I go backspace, I can get rid of that stencil shape. But I'm going to go to one of my brushes, pick a nice color, and then I'm going to paint. And you'll see, because I've created this selection, let's just make it a little bit bigger. Try and move it to the side. It's only going to allow you, you're only going to be able to paint inside the selection you've created. Okay? You can put any colors you want here. Okay. I wasn't going to keep this, but just for the purposes of the demo, we will keep it. Basically, what you've done is that you've created a shape. All right, and you can always use. You can go back and use that later. Let's see some of my favorite. Let's use bristle. So you can see the watercolor is flowing already in there. Okay, in this shape. And as long as you paint within these lines, or within the selection shape, you will be able to constrain where your paint marks are. So this is now very similar to what we did when I created a watercolor with selections. These are just the actual selections, and if you want, you can clip these selections to anything that you paint. Okay, it adds it to another layer. You can see on that layer. Okay, so I'm really just doing, I'm just painting in here really just to show you what you can do, which is basically paint inside the circle. So what we've done at the moment is we've painted we've created a selection, we've added to that selection, we've made a stencil, and we've ended up with some shapes which will allow us to paint just inside the shapes. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to dry the layer. So I want to dry the layer because what tends to happen is that the paint starts flowing outside as soon as you remove the selection. I really don't want that to happen. What you can do is you can either pause the diffusion and bring it down to 0, or you can do as I do, and I just prefer to dry the layer, or you can fast dry the layer. So if I do that and then I do Control D, that will remove the selection marks. If I do Control T, I can select all these shapes that I've created as one. So these are all on the same layer. This is still the same selection. I can move that. I can press Shift to constrain it so it doesn't come out of shape. Okay, and now I've got this selection, and then when I say OK, it will maintain its new shape and size. So now I'm going to create, I'm going to put some paint on the layer below, just to create a little bit of contrast. So I'm going to try and do this pretty quickly, and then maybe blend this. And the reason I'm doing this in a dark color, and I don't know, this might not turn out how I want it to turn out, is that I just want to get some contrast more than anything else. Okay, so I'm using the watercolor brush here. You can use oils or any brush. Okay. What I would typically do is that I would, bring in some elements and I would clip them, or if it's a stencil, you can bring in something and paint over it, and I go through that in my other video. But what I want to do here, what I want to try at least, and I've tried blending this, is to see what happens here. So we've got our circles at the top, and we've got our painted layer below, and then we've got I've got it closed at the moment. I'm going to close the circles and open the initial selections. So it's looking a little bit they're looking a little bit not faded but light, because against the backgrounds they are a bit on the light side. And if you want to change that, you can change them to something like, use a blend mode and change it to color burn. So move the painted layer up, and I'm going to clip it to, use a clipping mask and clip it to the layer below. So what happens there, actually, because let's just change that back to normal. Because what happens is when you change it to a blend mode and you do your first clipping mask, it actually removes the color. But you can see that the stencil has dictated what this upper layer is going to do. Okay, so I took our initial stencil, the line stencil, which is this one, became the mask. Okay, so, and the mask will control whatever's above that, above it. So now my previously bright stencils have taken on the color of the layer above. Now I'm going to release that, and you'll see this is back now, and the stencil is underneath. So now I'm going to open. So let's turn off this. Turn off the one below, and now we've got the circles. Okay, so our circle stencil, let's try clipping it and see what happens. So not really a lot happens because it's at the top. If I wanted to change that, I will release those clipping masks. I'm going to move it to underneath my painted mask, and then I'm going to clip it to the stencil. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a layer that I've painted and I'm clipping it to the stencil that I created. And now you have the stencils taking on the color of the layer. If you want to change that, you can do using a blend mode. You can change the layer. What you also can do is actually, I don't want to release the clipping mask there, is actually duplicate the layer. And if you duplicate the layer and set that at a blend mode, you will get a different it will take on a different effect. Okay, so I'm going to set that right back to normal, and I'm going to go to my layer 4 and set that back to normal. So because it's clipped, it's actually lighter. Okay, if I release the clipping mask, okay, if I release the clip mask, it's going to completely hide it. So I'm going to bring that layer below. If I want to show the stencil, I can bring the layer up. Okay, you can always play around with clipping these things. I'm going to open this one. So now I've opened both of them. If I want to do clipping mask, it doesn't have much of an effect there. Let's try that. Again, not much of an effect there. But you can try it with varying masks and varying paint layers, and you can play around with it and see what you get. But the main thing is that you can create a stencil and use that stencil to create abstract shapes. And you can also, I duplicated this particular layer, okay, so that's layer 4, but you can also, let's see if we can do this, merge the two layers into one, and then if you want to paint on that layer, paint actually on the stencil because you're painting underneath it. Okay, so it's a little bit confusing if you're watching it. Like I say, most of this you have to really play around experiment, see what works, see what doesn't, but it can give you quite a few interesting marks. If you don't like what it looks like clipped, you just release the clip. You just release the clipping mask that you've clipped to your layer. And if you don't want the layer, you can get your stencils back. Okay, so that's the initial stencil there, the circle stencil. If you don't want them both, you can just turn them off, and then you can just clip this to the layer below. But because this layer is off, that's what's going to happen. Okay, so just be aware of that you want to remember which ones you've turned on and which ones you've turned off. Okay, so, and if you move the layers in between each other, you can see that this stencil, the long stencil, is dictating the layers above. So that's why we've got this very interesting looking shape. Okay, so I hope you've learned something from this video. It's just been a video on some creative ways to use stencils, mix and match them, merge them, paint layers, and use the clipping mask function to create different art. Thanks for watching. Maybe I'll see you in a different video. Thanks. Bye.